And I want to turn now to Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa. Robert, you spent a lot of time in Plains, Georgia, where the president lived and will eventually be returned back to that place to be buried.
It was always special to go to Plains, Georgia. And now that President Carter and Mrs. Carter are gone, I can share a story about being down in Plains and walking by the Carter home. And as a reporter down there, you often tried to be discreet about two elderly people going about their lives, dealing with health struggles. So you didn't always report necessarily on every specific sighting. I saw Mrs. Carter out for a walk with her Secret Service detail. She was in a wheelchair. And you really got a sense that this was a couple until the end, until her passing, now ultimately his death. And when you think about his White House, this was always a family affair. When I talked to friends of Jimmy Carter, former advisors, his family moved with him to the White House. They brought that Georgia family, the sensibility, the roots, to Washington. Carter felt like an outsider at times in this city, but he was always an insider with his family. And that family was the backbone for him again and again.
Nicole Killion is also with us. She recently spoke with the director of the Carter Center about this entire process. Nicole?
Well, Major, we spoke at length with Dr. Meredith Evans, who is the director of the Carter Presidential Library and Museum, had a chance to tour that center and would encourage many people to do the same, especially as the president and his remains prepare to arrive there. But, you know, just like so many stories we have heard about the president, you know, there's that personal connection. And so when I first met her and did a tour of the library and museum, she told me about when she was 4 years old and she wrote a letter at the time to Jimmy Carter, offered to give him some money for his campaign, and ultimately she got a response to that letter. She said later, when she went on to direct the Presidential Library and Museum, she told the president about that, and they kind of shared a laugh about it. But for her, it really was this full circle moment from being that 4-year-old little girl to now directing this center that really is a life story of the president, beginning from his time in Plains and archery to when he joined the Naval Academy, to his time as governor, to his time in the White House, and of course post-presidency at the Carter Center. So it really was a joy to spend some time with her, to walk through that museum. And, you know, she talked a lot about the personal connection that both President Carter and Rosalynn Carter had, not only with the Carter Center, but also with the museum and library. They're often visiting, talking to everyone there, adults and children, when they would visit. There's a beautiful landscape there, kind of a nice garden on the grounds there that was very peaceful, but really part of the vision of the Carters when that center was constructed. So really, their imprint is throughout, and not only that Presidential Library and Museum, but the Carter Center as well, and certainly something that is very meaningful to someone like Meredith Evans, who directs that center.
And Nicole, what a great piece it is. We're going to air it tonight on the Weekend News, so I did get a chance to see it. But it seems like everyone in Plains or that surrounding area has a Jimmy Carter story, and no one knows more about that than presidential historian Douglas Brinkley. You had the honor of spending significant time with the former president, and when we spoke before this segment started, you were saying you were an admirer of his. You went to Louisiana, you made the connection, and from then on, you were able to really document history, from the people asking about a Pepsi versus a Coke and him demanding a Coke, to so many stories. But just if you could elaborate on that rich history and those personal stories that people seem to have who lived in that area.
Well, the first thing to keep in mind, and for listeners, is that Presidential Library, the Carter Library, is the National Archives. So it's got any document of the Carter years are in that library. Next to it, you could be forgiven for being confused, next to it is the Carter Center, which is an NGO. Carter had little interest in his library. He didn't want to stare at his memorabilia of the past. He was about now and fixing the world. And what determined the creation of the Carter Center, which incidentally is on the hilltop, the knoll where General Sherman stood when Atlanta burned in the Civil War, But what turned the Carter Center into what it is this assassination of Anwar Sadat. Because Sadat had made peace with Menachem Begin. That was the big deal, the Camp David Accord. Now in 1981, October, boom, Sadat got killed for the peace process. And Carter wept. He used to keep a photo of Anwar Sadat in his wallet. He had a photo on his desk. It was brother Anwar. They both loved agriculture, both had military backgrounds, and they bonded. And if Sadat could give his life for peace, Carter could donate his post-presidency for peace. And he honed in on looking where there were civil wars in the world that the United Nations couldn't determine. If something was going on in Sudan, the UN couldn't go in if it was a civil war, but Carter could go in and play a mediator. And remember, wherever Carter went around the world, he had Secret Service with them, so it was a big thing. Jimmy Carter comes to Somalia, and it's a huge event. And down the road from there is CNN. And Carter, one of his closest friends, is Ted Turner of CNN. I interviewed Ted Turner, and Ted said, you know, look, they criticized me for having Carter on all of his trips everywhere. They put Henry Kissinger on in New York all the time. They put, you know, all these pundits on. I've got a former president in my backyard, and I'm going to cover him. And so Carter and Turner became quite a team. That's where Carter's also bonded with Turner on wilderness and public lands and hunting and fly fishing. But without that megaphone, wherever Carter would go around the world, there's CNN cameras with him too. It became a big wallop, and by the late 80s, it was really working to the point in 1989, Carter was able to go to Panama and denounce General Manuel Noriega, to say that was a flat-out illegal election in Panama, and Central America believed Carter. Same in Nicaragua. He told Daniel Ortega, the Sandinistas, you lost. Your best bet in life is to bring democracy to Nicaragua. So it was starting now to become a peacemaker on a whole new way out of that Carter Center.